Hey team, wanted to do an impromptu video on it was actually a presentation I did back in the year, I think it was the year 2016 or 2017, it was something I did quite a few years ago. I found this in the archives and it was a presentation I've already done, and I thought, hey, for many of you, you wouldn't have seen this presentation and you'll find great value from it. So I'll be going through this presentation. Hopefully I remember roughly how it goes. So today's presentation is all about your metabolism, and again, this is really the presentation. The idea is to present an educational piece and then link it to a scenario which I'll speak about here, so you can see the practical implications. So we're going to be running through all about your metabolism. I'm going to be running through the basics. So guys, when it comes to your metabolism, understanding, go look at our metabolism is much more than just simply something that will impact our weight, whether we lose weight or gain weight. Our metabolism is made up of 4 different areas. Our basal metabolic rate. So basal metabolic rate, think of that as our, if we're just laying down and not moving, the metabolic function is required to keep us alive. So, to keep many of our organs functioning, much of the underlying biochemistry in our body. We then have the thermic effect of activity, which is when we exercise. So if you go exercise, you go do a gym workout, that is thermic effect of activity. Thermic effect of food is whenever we eat, and the metabolic spike that's related to digestion and utilization, the anabolic and catabolic impact of food on our body, on our underlying biochemistry. And the final non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which shortened is NEAT, is non-exercise activity thermogenesis is essentially, which I may touch on in a second, I'm not sure, I haven't looked over this slideshow in a couple of years, is essentially, so non-exercise activity, so we have gym, is our incidental activity. So if we go for a walk, we're just walking around throughout the day, we walk upstairs, we fidget, we talk faster, that's non-exercise activity, which I'll delve into deeper. So we're going to be running through what influences each component, what happens to each component during caloric restriction, and what some useful strategies to maximize each component even while restricting calories. So again, I think you'll find massive value from this, because we're going to go through what influences, so we're going to run over each component so you have an understanding of each component. You'll also understand what influences each and every one of those components. Then we'll run through what happens to each component during caloric restriction, which if you're trying to lose weight, that's essentially what you're doing. So what happens to that element? And then we're going to look at practical strategies to maximize that component and try to restrict some metabolic adaptations as they occur, which is quite cool. So meet Jane and John. So Jane and John are going to be our 2 characters for the practical side. I'm going to be using them as an example. So basal metabolic rate, can you feel those cellular reactions occurring? Okay, you probably can't, but look, all the cellular reactions in our body, that is our basal metabolic rate, really simply. And what we've got to understand, I'm not sure if I have it here, but what influences your basal metabolic rate is muscle mass, fat mass, organs, brain, gender, age, genetics. They all play a role in your basal metabolic rate. So for, muscle mass, fat mass, organs, they're all metabolically active. They require, metabolic reactions to occur, which essentially has an energetic cost. Gender, age, genetics, they all play a role. So all these things here make up your basal metabolic rate. So what happens to our basal metabolic rate when restricting calories is, so when we restrict calories, is depending on what you are doing, depending on your weight, depending on how lean you are, depending on the strategies you undertake, there is a risk of muscle mass. The loss of muscle mass. So again, that can be very individual. For some, there will be no loss of muscle mass. For others, there can be quite a hefty loss of muscle mass, especially if you're doing things the wrong way or if you're quite lean. So again, muscle mass is metabolically active. So as you reduce calories, you'll lose muscle mass, which means your metabolic rate will slow down your basal metabolic rate. Fat mass as well. Hopefully if you're losing weight, that's metabolically active. And cellular reactions. So let's go to Jane and John. So, we'll go back a second. So cellular reactions as well. So as I will talk about a bit later, is the basal metabolic rate doesn't really change too much as you diet. There are some metabolic adaptations, but they're not massive. So even cellular reactions, so a good example is with women, is when women get, this is just one example, we probably know women who are athletes, when they get quite lean, is they'll lose their menstrual cycle. Guys, When you are quite lean and your body feels like you're starving, your menstrual cycle or reproduction is the last of your body's worries. Cellular reactions, even in terms of, brain function, is when we get tired and fatigued, is again, that's a down regulation in cellular reactions. So again, these are all ways that our body is looking for homeostasis. Our body wants homeostasis with everything in the body, whether it be our blood sugar levels, whether it be, even in terms of things like blood pressure. Same with energy balance. It doesn't want us expending too many calories. It wants to keep the energy intake and energy expenditure roughly very similar. So, Jane and John, so what they can do is they can do resistance training to mitigate muscle loss. Again, this is something that I hear all the time, which is a load of BS. Is people will undertake very low calorie diets and they'll be told not to exercise, which is just silly. Look, resistance training is the #1 way to mitigate muscle loss while dieting. If you are not doing some sort of resistance training, there is a good chance you will lose a good percentage of muscle mass, which is not going to be beneficial in terms of maintaining, and it's just going to turn you into a smaller version of yourself. So if you're 30% body fat, you'll just weigh less and still be 30% body fat because you've lost muscle as well. Educate that smaller body uses less energy. So if you were 85 kilos and now 65 kilos, is the 65 kilo version of you, because there's less fat on your body, with all other things being equal, is your metabolic rate, or basal metabolic rate, is going to be less. A smaller body uses less energy. As weight loss proceeds, calories will need to be reduced. So, thermic effect of food. So, basal metabolic rate, guys, really the key takeaway is, or the practical implications are, you want to preserve lean muscle mass. That's really the main thing. Preserve lean muscle mass and understand the fact that as you lose weight, your basal metabolic rate will decline purely because you are in a smaller body. So thermic effect of food, how much energy does your body need to break down that food? So what influences your thermic effect of food? So macronutrient ratio, up or down, or insulin resistance. So whenever you eat food, there is an energy cost to break down, digest, all the anabolic catabolic reactions that occur from that. Now, when I touch on here macronutrient ratio, is protein has a higher metabolic cost than carbohydrates and fat. Alcohol has a higher cost than fats. Again, it's a case of if you eat the average thermic effect of food in terms of our entire metabolic rate is 10%. Now, 10% of the food that we intake. Now, protein has a thermic effect of food of around 20 to 30%. Again, there is variance in individuals, whereas carbs and fats are a lot lower, between a couple of percent up to, 8-9% maximum. So if someone starts eating a higher protein diet, their thermic effect of food, their metabolism will increase. If someone's eating a high carbohydrate diet, lower protein, is their thermic effect of food will be much lower. The second one here is insulin resistance. There's quite a bit of research showing that if you have high levels of insulin resistance, that will impact your thermic effect of food. The spike in metabolism from eating food. So insulin resistance, I think I might touch on this in a second. Let's have a look. So quickly, what happens to our thermic effect of food when restricting calories? So, yeah, right here. So less calories equal less macronutrients. So if you go from eating 2,000 calories a day to, let's say, 1,500, you're eating less calories, which means less protein, less carbs, less fat. And as we said, protein, carbs, and fats. Protein, fat, carbs, and fats have a metabolic cost to them. So if you're eating less, then naturally you're consuming less macronutrients, which means that your thermic effect of food will decrease. That's just saying that, that's just something that will occur. There's nothing you can really go against that. I think I might touch on in a second that if you have a higher ratio of protein, it can mitigate that. And something we'll discover in the future. So make sure optimal protein is consumed. So if you're decreasing your calories, but you increase your protein intake, you can pretty much probably mitigate the drop in thermic effect of food, because most people tend to eat a high carbohydrate, high fat diet. And resistance training may play an important role. So especially with up here, insulin resistance. What's the best way to reverse insulin resistance and increase insulin sensitivity? Lifting weights. Lifting weights under tension. That's really the most efficient way to do that. So you start to see here that when it comes to metabolism, is really Exercise, the role exercise plays, again, it'll play a role with thermic effective activity, which I'll touch on in a second, but it plays a massive role in the basal metabolic rate, preserving that and our thermic effect of food, how efficient that is. So how many calories are we burning from exercise? What influences your thermic effective activity? So thermic effective activity, just again, guys, is exercise that we're planning to do. So if we go to the gym, that's exercise. So we have calories burnt during exercise, and we have increased calories burnt after exercise due to the exercise. So the final one there, that people call that EPOC, afterburn effect. Lots of marketers try and make their new exercise fad seem amazing. It's like, man, you burn so many calories after. That's just a physiological consequence to exercise that every type of exercise has. It's just some are more efficient than others. So what happens to our thermic effective activity when restricting calories? It's quite cool. So let's say, for example, that day one, Jane and John, who we're speaking about, they go to the gym. Let's use Jane as an example, because Jane and John will have different metabolic costs. Let's say Jane goes to the gym, and day one she does workout A, and she burns 500 calories. Again, that'd be quite a big workout to burn 500 calories, but let's say she burns 500 calories. Now, day 60, Jane, let's say she does the exact same workout, but she's been in a caloric deficit and she's lost a bit of weight. What happens? So first exercise, day one, she burnt 500 calories. Day 60, she's lost some weight, she's been in a caloric deficit. What happens? First thing is exercise intensity and volume will decrease. So again, there can be, for beginners, this probably won't be as much of, depending on the deficit, as much of an issue. But for people that have been going to the gym quite a bit, is normally when you are in a caloric deficit and you're on reduced calories, is your intensity or the amount of volume of work you can do is decrease, because naturally you have less energy. Now, in Jane's situation, I would postulate that because maybe Jane hasn't been doing a whole heap before, now she's started exercising, her capacity in terms of intensity and volume has increased. So for many people, is their exercise intensity or volume will decrease, but if you are new to the gym, it will actually increase. So the second one is the important one. Smaller body burns less calories. So Jane, day one compared to day 60, let's say she weighs 5 kilos less, day 60, is a smaller body. The version of her that weighs 5 kilos more will burn more calories doing the same intensity of exercise, the same volume. Real simple. So day 60, she might burn, again, like these are just arbitrary numbers, let's say 460 calories instead of 500. Exercise efficiency. A couple of things happen is, as we exercise, we get more efficient at exercise. It makes sense. As we do more burpees or more squats, we get more efficient metabolically. Second thing is, when we are restricting calories, our body is looking for homeostasis. It's down-regulating certain mechanisms. It's trying to make everything more efficient, which is, the clever machine it is. So let's say, for example, day one is if Jane wants to do a squat, there'll be a certain metabolic cost, and let's call that X. Day 60, to do that same squat, is she's far more efficient, which means that, it might be 5%, 10% less calories for her to do that same squat. So you can see Jane, day 60, she might only be burning 440, 430 calories instead of Jane, session 1, keeping the intensity and the volume the same. Now, if Jane has increased her capacity in terms of fitness, gotten stronger and stuff like that, she can, definitely overcome these obstacles. But it's just keeping variables the same. If she was to do the same thing day 60 as she would day 1, she would burn much, much less calories. How clever is the body? So resistance training is one way you can get around this. Resistance training tends to, the cool thing with resistance training is when you're on the treadmill, when you're doing cardio, it's probably working to a certain capacity. Now with resistance training, if you're doing a squat day 1 compared to day 60, is day 60 you might be doing an extra 10 kilos on that squat, which means the intensity and volume of that work has increased and the metabolic cost has increased. So resistance training, because it's very tangible in terms of, you can progressively overload the muscle and really mitigate some of those metabolic adaptations that are just here. Optimal calorie consumption to maintain intensity and volume. So, like I mentioned, is if you put Jane on, let's say we'll go to an extreme. Let's put Jane on 500 calories a day. When she gets to day 60 compared to day 1 she was quite fed. She was eating quite a bit of food. Day 60, she's eating 500 calories a day. Even though, day 60, Jane is probably, been working harder, is day 1, Jane has so much more energy to work at a higher intensity for longer. So you're going to make sure that when you're reducing calories, we're not reducing them by too much, where they'll impact our work capacity. And tracking progression with exercise. This is really simple. I harp on this so much, guys, especially those at the studio. You'll know me. It's a case of, whatever weight you're lifting today is in 12 weeks' time is you want to be lifting a little bit more or some extra reps. Why? Because if you're recovering properly, which most people will, and even if you're not recovering amazingly well, is you're going to be stronger and fitter in 12 weeks' time. So doing that same weight is going to have less of a metabolic consequences, which is what we want. We want these metabolic reactions to occur that then impact our, hormones, whole host of other things. So NEAT, non-exercise, and this is really funny. NEAT is NEAT is my favorite. It's funny when I first got into health and fitness, is non-exercise activity, thermogenesis, and thermic effective activity were just called exercise. Then they separated them because they found out that the research was showing that non-exercise activity was so important that it needs to be its own thing. So how much body does your body burn through NEAT? What influences your non-exercise activity? So again, this is anything that's not planned exercise. So if you go for a walk, that's NEAT. If you walking upstairs, if you're fidgeting, if you're, let's say you're cleaning something, whatever it may be, that's non-exercise activity. Incidental activity and hormones. These are the two key ones that impact NEAT. So if you're a farmer, your non-exercise activity is naturally going to be very, very high compared to if you work in an office, it's naturally going to be very low. So as to our NEAT when restricting calories, it's quite cool. Incidental movement decreases, fidgeting decreases as well. So this is a really common one where you see people go to the gym, and let's say, for example, Jane or John, they go to the gym 3 days a week. They burn 400 calories each session, which is probably in the ballpark. They burn 1,200 calories extra a week. So they're burning 1,200 calories extra a week over those 3 sessions. Now, the body's quite clever where what it'll do is do a couple of different... There's actually one thing that's on the other side of the equation that I'll touch on as well. But what it'll do is it will start to, again, it'll make us more efficient with our movement. But what it'll also do is it'll decrease our incidental movement. So after work or after your day, you're going to be far less likely to want to, maybe walk the dog or maybe, walk around, do some stuff at home. Throughout the days, instead of 10,000 steps, you might start doing 9,000 steps. You might start fidgeting less, little things like that. You might start talking a little bit slower. All these different things occur. And when we increase our non-exercise activity, is all the other things that we've ran through, like thermic effective activity, thermic effective food, basal metabolic rate, they also get impacted. So those 1,200 extra calories, your body might down-regulate, your incidental movement and fidgeting and stuff like that by, let's say, 150 calories a day, which isn't massive. Like going from 10,000 steps to 9,000 steps and fidgeting a little less, you wouldn't even notice. But that might end up being 100, 150 calories a day, which over the space of 7 days ends up being close to the 1,200 calorie mark, which means our net caloric deficit is now 0. This one's really, really common. And in all the literature, where they put people in metabolic chambers, everything, is when people plateau weight loss wise or when their metabolism slows, is always their non-exercise activity. Their thermic effective activity, thermic effective food, basal metabolic rate, they don't slow down massively. It's always non-exercise activity. So whenever someone comes to me and they're at the point of plateauing, is what I know is going to be a very good chance that it's going to be the non-exercise activity, and that's what they need to increase. It's not doing more in the gym. They're already doing enough. They're already causing all the hormonal changes which we want. The other thing though is it can also increase our hunger. Is when we exercise and stuff like that, say we're burning an extra 1,200 calories, there is the other side of the equation, our intake, is our body will upregulate hunger, causing us to maybe binge eat on a Saturday where we might eat an extra 500-600 calories. So let's put this into perspective. Jane or John is burning 400 calories 3 times a week, 1,200 calories in the gym. Now, let's say, for example, the body upregulates hunger hormones. So Jane and John are now eating an extra 400 calories on Saturday and Sunday, so 200 extra calories a day, which is nothing. And then they're, taking 1,000 steps less per day, and they're fidgeting a little less. That there would equate to around 1,200 calories a week. So you can start to see how it's not one magic thing, but it's a whole host of little things. And because it's little things, it can be hard for us to be self-aware of. That's actually the idea why I did this presentation a couple of years ago. Is when we run through all these things, it really puts things in perspective that there is no like magic cure when it comes to stopping weight loss, or it's not a case of we can't lose weight. It's just a case of a whole host of physiological adaptations occur, like I've just said, that are tiny, but all add up. So what that means, I think I might have it here. Sorry guys, just quickly off topic. So non-exercise activity, how you can overcome that incidental activity maintained or increased. So look, if you start exercising, monitor your non-exercise activity, maintain or increase it. Track energy levels. If your energy levels go to the floor, there's a good chance that again your non-exercise activity is decreasing. Optimal calorie consumption, caffeine. I put caffeine. The caffeine is one way to overcome as well. But things like step trackers, they can be helpful as well. Always different things. So here are my thoughts, guys. So our metabolic rate is going to decline while restricting calories or losing weight. It's natural, it just happens. Many people say, hey, I helped Jane lose 5 kilos and Ashley lost 5 kilos, her metabolism increased by 1,000 calories per day. That didn't happen at the same time. There may have been some reverse dieting after, where carbohydrates were increased, stuff like that. There might have been a lot of extra exercise done. Look, it's a case of your metabolic rate is going to decline while restricting calories or losing weight. It just happens, as I ran through. Resistance training or some form is highly beneficial while restricting calories. From a consulting standpoint, I would never, I would find it ethically wrong to tell anyone not to do resistance training while losing weight. Again, I can go off topic, but there's research showing that if people lose muscle mass while dieting, they will regain the fat mass until they've regained the muscle mass. Everything like leptin will be down regulated until they regain that lean muscle. So important. Our metabolic rate and energy consumption are closely linked and influence the other. That's important as well. So when you decrease calories, our metabolic rate will decrease. And as we increase calories, the other thing, our metabolic rate will increase as well. Non-exercise activity increases, stuff like that. It's important that they're closely linked, they influence each other. And what we're essentially trying to do is we're trying to decrease our intake of food while increasing the other, which goes against our basic human physiology. So it's important to keep that in mind. And your body is smarter than any program ever will be. That's an important one as well. Guys, it comes down to the key principles, and hopefully from this video, hopefully you've gotten a lot of value from in terms of understanding the components of our metabolism, understanding what influences it, understanding what happens when you decrease calories, and some simple strategies, because the strategies aren't super sexy in terms of what's required. There's key principles, and many of the key principles you're doing. In terms of if you're stalling weight-wise or not losing, is a case of all these metabolic adaptations are probably happening at the same time, and because they're all happening at a small level or a micro level, it's hard to be aware that they're actually occurring. But if we take this as the data and this as the science, and again this has been heavily proven, is we can go and say, okay, if I'm stalling or I'm not losing, there's a good chance everything that Hayden's ran through is occurring. So what happens? What are some strategies I can put in place, understanding that they are probably happening, to overcome them, mitigate them, and then hopefully, in terms of weight loss goals or not gaining weight, they can be conducive to the goals I'm after. Guys, hopefully you found value from this video. I've got a whole heap of other videos. Everywhere around different presentations I've done over the years. So if you found value from this, please let me know.